Well, greetings, listeners, and welcome back to one of our discussions. The theme of all these discussions really is beauty, matter, spirit, God, man, all these unions of opposite. And today I have with me a friend, a colleague, an apprentice from New Zealand, Mark Fisher. I met Mark in New Zealand where I was there giving some talks at an icon exhibition at the Auckland City Gallery and did a short workshop. And I met Mark there at this workshop, and he's obviously very gifted. And we talked afterwards about how he could train as an icon painter, and I suggested various means, and one of them was an apprenticeship. Not thinking any more about it really, because he lived on the other side of the world. But a few months later, he emailed me and said, I'd like to be your apprentice. And so here he is. He arrived a few months ago. So Mark's quite an expert, I would say, on symbolism. And this is the main theme I want to talk with Mark about. So welcome, Mark. It's great to have you with us. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your story and how you've got where you are now.
Yeah, so I wasn't raised a Christian or anything, but I was always an arty kid. So that was kind of always what I wanted to do. So went through school and then got into art school. I was living in Melbourne in Australia at the time. So I went to RMIT, did a Bachelor of Fine Arts. At the beginning of my bachelor, I got into Jordan Peterson. And that really had a big impact on my life because that was really my introduction to symbolism and kind of the question of meaning and consciousness and stuff like that in a way that felt very serious. And Jordan also, through his talks on the Bible, kind of opened me up to the possibility that in religion and in Christianity there was something of value there. Before I just hadn't really thought about it much. But I never went to church because of Jordan. So it was only really at the end of my degree. During my degree, I kind of, sort of because of Jordan's influence, but also because of the influence of the university and the direction they push you, I was kind of struggling the whole time between two poles of the question of meaning in art, like how deliberate can you be about putting meaning into your art, or is art just this like purely kind of instinctual process where you're kind of making things and breaking things and you don't want to think too much about it. But sort of towards the end of my degree, I had kind of developed my own sort of symbolic language, which for me did somewhat unite those two poles, because there was an element of meaning there, but it was an element of meaning achieved not through kind of just thinking about it beforehand and then injecting it into the work, but it was like a very intuitive process where you would start with one level of meaning but then realize later that it had this whole other level of meaning. So it kind of united those two ways of making art for me, but it was just my own personal symbolic language. It didn't really have much ability to speak to other people because it was very just kind of self-centered and psychological. But then right at the end of my degree, I got into Jonathan Peugeot, and that just kind of turned my whole world upside down. I listened to his talk on I think it's called The Only Solution to Culture, and it's a talk on the difference between traditional art and contemporary art. And that just planted a seed in my head that by the end of my degree, I just was basically ready to leave contemporary art behind, and felt like I had kind of found the solution to my problem in the traditional understanding of art, which was, for me, like the best way to understand it is just to look at the word itself, art, and how it's used today versus how it was used in the past. And so today there's always like this question really of what is art, like it's not even sure how to define it, but it's a problem of thinking that art is like an object that you make or something.
Mm-hmm.
So is this toilet art if we put it in the gallery and sign our name on it or whatever? But that is not the way that traditional people use the word. They use it, we still use it that way when we say like the art of painting or the art of conversation or the art of anything really. And so art was not like a thing that you make, but it was the way in which you would
Mm-hmm.
make something, anything well,
Mm-hmm.
really. And so for me then it became clear that just going to the studio every day and making art, that isn't really a purpose. Like that doesn't make any sense, because making art isn't really a thing. You're making something, and then the question is really, does the world need that something that you're making?
Mm-hmm. So then art is part of ritual. It's not just a play set, it's the play and the set. It's movement and object, and the play set only has meaning in the context of the actors doing things. So is that what you're saying, that art isn't just the end product, it's the function it has in the larger culture?
Yeah, it's definitely about function. I think, and that was what attracted me to traditional art, was a grounding in function. And yeah, because they're not just making art for art's sake, and so you would think, oh, okay, so it's just functionalism, so, but if you look at traditional cultures, it doesn't look like what a modern person might think functionalism would look like, because everything is covered in beauty and images and ornament and stuff. But I think that is actually just because ancients had a fuller understanding of more functions than we do today.
Could expand on that a bit.
Yeah. Sorry. Today there's really like a split between art and function, where we have galleries with these like crazy expensive artworks, very rarefied objects, but that don't really land in the world in any way. They don't do anything. They just sit on the wall and are objects of contemplation. But you also have the opposite, where you have mass production, like industry, Rene Guénon calls it, where, like you just have mass-produced objects that are functional, that you put in your home, but they have no beauty. They're not made by hand. There's no particularity to them. So there's kind of a split between this quantity of functional objects and then this like quality, but which doesn't land in any functional thing. Whereas in the ancient world, every spoon would have been made by an artisan, every hair comb, and you can look at the stuff they have in museums, and it's just like functional objects.
I experienced that at Mount Athos. A traditional task of hermits was to make spoons.
Yeah.
And I studied some of these spoons, and they were just, you could put them in a pedestal in an art gallery.
Yeah.
They were so functional, but they're made of prayer. The idea is you could do a job as a hermit that was skillful, was needed, but also you could pray while you're making it, and you just felt that they understood the stresses in that spoon. So that's an example of something that was functional but made with beauty and handmade.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So what was the next step then? So you sort of had this revelation, as it were, or growing revelation of traditional art wasn't just something to be discarded as old and therefore useless. So what was your next step?
Yeah, well, because it was through Jonathan Peugeot, it was a particular interest in icons that I got into, and I saw in the icon like just the synthesis of so many things that I had kind of done in the past, and I saw a real potential and found a desire to do that. But I was also just a secular guy. So and through Jonathan's work as well, I started getting into orthodoxy. It wasn't just the icons, but kind of the whole worldview, the metaphysics, but in orthodoxy, icons aren't just apart from that. They're kind of intimately, they are a symbol of that whole thing. So that was in the end of 2019, 2020. So I was just learning about this stuff on YouTube, and decided, okay, I better go to a church. So I went to a Orthodox church nearby. It was an Antiochian church. So
this was in Australia or New Zealand?
Yes, in Melbourne. I was still in Melbourne then. It was, the whole service was in Arabic, and it was the first like liturgy I'd ever been to, so it was a very alien experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I spoke to the priest after, and he said, come back on Wednesday because we have an English service on Wednesday, so went to that. I came a bit early, met some other young guys kind of like me, some guys who'd been there for a bit, some guys who were kind of seeking, and that was better. But it was still like I didn't get liturgy. It was still like weird to me. Like, what's happening? What are we doing? Like sensing these things. And,
what had been your religious background? Any church experience?
No, I think I'd gone to church like once,
right.
with my grandparents. Maybe.
And how old were you at that time?
I don't even know. I remember it was like I was very.
No, I mean when you went to your Antiochian church.
Oh right. I was about 21.
That's amazing. Yeah. So for 21 years, you'd only been to one church service your whole life.
Unless it was like a funeral or something, I might have gone to those. But so was still not sure about liturgy, so I wasn't really sure if I was going to go back. And then lockdowns happened, so I couldn't go back anyway. In Melbourne, they had really brutal, long lockdowns. But in a way that was sort of a blessing because I just had all this time to like read and watch stuff on YouTube and learn heaps. And because I was interested in traditional arts, I was reading an article by you actually on iconography and training young iconographers or new iconographers. And
that's an Orthodox arts journal,
yeah. And you mentioned the Prince's Foundation School, now the King's Foundation School. So I went on their website and I was just like blown away. I was like, oh my god, there's a traditional art school that still exists. So I was really like head over heels with this place and was reading everything on their website and really resonating with the traditional art ethos that they were talking about on there. And then I also came across their images of recent student work that they were showing, or recent graduate work. And there was one guy's stuff that really stuck out to me. It was these watercolor paintings based on Cosmati mosaic.
Could you explain what Cosmati mosaic is?
Yeah, you might be able to explain better than me, but they're geometric pavements that is it because it was a particular family?
Cosmati, Italian family Cosmati. Probably it was made before then, but they're associated with their name now.
But they're these beautiful, somewhat Byzantine or Roman even geometric patterns that are usually on the floor in a lot of churches over the world. Because they have a big emphasis on geometry at the Prince's or the King's School. There were these paintings based on these. They stuck out to me. They had a particular color palette as well, which made sense in hindsight. So I was looking at them, and then I saw in the biography that the guy who made them was Orthodox, and that he was based in Australia. So I was like, oh, interesting. So I went on his website, and then it said he was based in Melbourne, where I was living. So I was like, oh wow, okay. So I just wrote him an email saying like, hey man, I'm kind of getting into Orthodoxy and traditional art. I just stumbled across your work, and I see you're also based in Melbourne. Would you like to just get a coffee sometime and talk about stuff? And then he replied to me and he said, hi, your name seems kind of familiar. Did we meet at St. Nicholas Church a few months ago? And he was one of the young people that I met at...
What a collection of coincidences, providential.
Yeah. So that was big. And then, so shout out to Mark. His name is also Mark Tittinen. He, throughout the really long lockdowns, he was more mature in Orthodoxy, so he was able to answer like all my inquirer questions during that time.
And being a convert himself, he probably understood where you're coming from, perhaps
Yeah.
more than someone who'd been raised in the
Yeah,
faith.
probably. Yeah. Yeah, and so that was all great. Despite that, I'm sort of an indecisive person, so it took me kind of like 3 years of inquiring to eventually get baptized. So even before that happened was when I had decided that because most of my family was living in New Zealand, I was going to move back to New Zealand and just live there for a bit, be with my family. And about a month or something before I had already decided to go and was going there, my dad sent me an email from the Auckland Art Gallery. Auckland was the city I was moving to, saying that they were having an exhibition of iconography, like ancient icons. And so I was like, oh, that's cool, a coincidence. And then just after that, they also announced that they'd be having Aidan Hart speak there. And because I was familiar with your work, I was like, oh, wow, all right. So I booked tickets to the talks and the workshops that you were giving. And yeah, went there, moved there, went to those, and that's how we met. And we kind of hit it off. And yeah, you offered me the apprenticeship. So I sort of knew that if I did get baptized, that was the path I would take because it's a great opportunity. So now here I am.
Well, yeah, in our studio here, this is the book collection in my studio. We're actually in the studio, and every Monday to Friday, between about 9 and 6, we're here, and he's receiving his own commissions now, which is great. Normally, someone would be quite a few years training before they're able to take commissions, but Mark is gifted, and he's been able to receive commissions, which he makes under my oversight, so that he's learning while he's being paid to paint icons. So it's a good working relationship.
Yeah.
And incidentally, another lady from New Zealand, another person from New Zealand, has just come, and she's normally here, but she's out today. She's another apprentice. So I really believe in apprenticeships. Institutions are good, but apprenticeships are a great, more natural way of learning, I think, because you've overheard me talking with clients and all that. So you're not just learning the technique, are you? We have conversation about theology.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're diversifying a bit. So we wanted to talk a bit about symbolism. I know Jonathan Padro's talks have had a big influence on you. A background to symbolism and iconography, the theological basis for icons of Christ, of course, is that God has become visible in Christ. So we depict the person of Christ, not a symbol of Christ. And there is a council called the Council of Trullo being Greek for dome, as it was under a dome. They said, from henceforth, let us not depict Christ as a lamb, but as he is, as the person of Christ. So in that sense, it was saying we don't need symbols of Christ because we have the real Christ. Nonetheless, symbols or signs, we talk about now about symbol and sign, continue to be used in iconography. So a martyr would hold a cross to indicate that she was a martyr, and so on and so forth. So could you tell us a bit about your understanding of the distinction between sign and symbol? Because the icon is a sign in the sense that it's not the actual person, but we do meet the person through the icon.
Yes.
So could you tell us a bit about sign and symbols? I know you've said it's really important that we understand there is a distinction.
Yes, and to be honest, it's a hard thing. Like the best thing to do is just to watch lots of Jonathan Peugeot videos, because it's something that takes kind of repetition to get. Like, I don't know that there's a way to like make it click instantly for people, but in a definitional sense, a sign is just something that points to something else, and it's basically one directional. So
give me some examples then of signs.
Flag?
Flag.
Yeah, a flag. Yes, flags. A stop sign. It's just, we recognize that it's a red shape and it says these things, and that tells you to stop. It just kind of points one way. Or I think I heard an example once was like, a love heart is a sign for love, but a kiss is a symbol of love.
Okay, an actual kiss.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes, kissing someone. It's a symbolic act. It actually participates in love, but it also does point to love, something beyond it. Like the love is not entirely contained in one kiss. That doesn't contain all of your love for someone, but it is a symbolic act which kind of demonstrates.
So it's a symbol assuming some degree of encounter through the symbol. You can't kiss someone if they're living on the other side of the world. So a symbol is a bit more intimate than a sign. A sign is something read mentally.
Yeah.
Whereas a symbol, often anyway, has more ontological content. You don't have to have read about what that blue and white flag means.
Yes. Yeah. It's
What does the word symbol mean? Could you tell us what the word symbol means?
Yeah, well, in the Greek it means to throw two things together.
Symbolos, yeah.
And in that sense, that's also something crucial to symbolism, is that, like in the Jonathan Peugeot sense, there is nothing that is not symbolic, because when we talk about symbolism, we're actually just talking about the way that things exist metaphysically, basically, which is that there's always something which is uniting something, and also everything also has parts. So this microphone here, I'm able to look at it and see, oh, that's a microphone. I don't have to do any like bottom up kind of thing. I just see it and I'm like, because I know that there is such a thing as microphone, I can see that this is a microphone, even though it might look quite different to other microphones. But at the same time, I can break it apart into this fluffy thing on top, and then the knobs and the black paint on it and whatever else. And that is symbolic in the sense that it is a gathering of all those parts, and then the descent of an identity into that. And that is what symbolism is. Symbolism is when we kind of gather things in a way that they host something which is beyond them. So it's like I was saying with the kiss. All of love is not contained in any one kiss, but
contains a part of it.
Yes, and
is there then a relationship, a strong corollary between icon and symbol? Because the word icon, which means, of course, image, assumes actually three elements: the viewer, the image, the icon, and what the icon depicts, the subject. So the icon is like a symbol, and it throws together the viewer and the thing it depicts.
Yeah.
So it has a meaning beyond itself. And as St. John of Damascus emphasised, and also Theodore, that an icon is both like and unlike. So an icon of Christ should look like Christ, but on the other hand, Christ is more than just the painted image of him.
Yeah.
So immediately we say this is like, we've got to say this is also unlike. It's both and. In studying the writings of St. John of Damascus on the divine icons recently for an article I was writing, it struck me how he emphasised a lot how the icon is actually an ontological part not only of the created world, but also the Holy Trinity. So he says there are 5 levels of icon. We could perhaps say the same of symbol if we understand that word correctly. So the top in the hierarchy is Christ is the perfect image icon of the Father. And then we go down a bit further, he talks about the ideas in God's mind, to use human terms, of things he was going to create. So I have an idea of an icon in my head first, and I make it. So that idea is like an icon, you see, the eternal purposes of God before he created them. It's an icon. And then he goes through other levels as well, the Old Testament types, icons of things to come. So it struck me that icons aren't just these objects, the symbolism, that's the objects we see, but in fact, we're created to live symbolically. Like I meet you and I honour you as a person, ultimately because you're an image of God.
Yeah.
So immediately I stop believing in God. Oh, you're a person of value, but you're a more complicated animal than a worm. But, it's very limited.
Yeah.
Immediately I recognise you're an icon of something higher. A completely different relationship opens up.
Yeah.
So could you go on from that? How do you understand the essence of secularism, let's call it atheistic secularism, which is probably a good definition of our modern society or the direction it's going. How can we be saved from the deadliness of atheistic secularism by reviving a true sense of symbol as an ontological way of living?
Yeah. And I think like a good way is actually to start with low things, and that's what Jonathan does a lot, is just he'll talk about like how something is like the pattern of the super high like event, like the crucifixion, but then he will show how like a cup, like just a glass cup, has those same patterns in its existence. And I think that is a good way to talk to secular people, just to wake them up to the fact that the experience that they're having all the time of anything is symbolic and meaningful, and you can kind of, that's why I said it takes repetition, because I think it just takes a lot of pointing out analogies in creation, like oh, this thing is like that, and then you do that enough and they will start to think, oh, that's not just like some like metaphor that you've made up that's nice, it's like, oh, that really is like that, and there really is like analogy built into different layers of being.
And is it true then that all of us live symbolically, but we artificially make a cut-off point? So we're all of us, because we're made in God's image, are living symbolically, but it depends how far we want to take that.
Yeah.
So I would say, okay, everything's symbolic, but it stops at the created world, which has just happened by chance, so there's nothing beyond the created world, whereas we would understand the created world being a reflection of something yet higher.
Yeah.
And even Christ himself, though he's God, he would always refer back to the Father. So even he, who's God, who could have said, I'm God, he would always point beyond to the Father.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just, I mean, there's secular normal people, and then there's people like, say, John Vervaeke, who are, I wouldn't want to call him secular per se, but he's not religious, but he believes in God way more than like normal secular people. Like he's really like a Neoplatonist, like, and so for me, like, just on an intellectual level, I don't know how you can, I think you at least need like something like that, like the first cause or like the one, like, and then I don't think that's enough. I think you do have to take it to something like the Trinity to really make sense of creation. But like even the brightest, best of the more scientific, non-religious people that I see today on the cutting edge of things are a lot closer to a traditional view that has something like God, like an infinite out of which the finite comes. So then when you're talking to normal secular people, that it's different, because they're not so intellectual, like they're not, you can't really take that tact with them and do Neoplatonic metaphysics. So that, again, it's like, I think just the best way is just to point out meaningful symbols in creation, just say
day-to-day life.
Interesting.
Wisdom's interesting, isn't it? Because I've met people who aren't intellectuals, but they're so much wiser than intellectual. So wisdom, I suppose, is perceiving the meaning of something. It's not just knowing lots of things, it's perceiving the meaning, the role.
It's knowing what to perceive, really.
What to perceive within that thing, So you can get a bread baker who just understands the meaning of things, where you can get a professor who's so grand, but he's a fool if he doesn't perceive.
And that is
the
because
essence of God and things.
That is because of symbolism, in a way, because in the embodied act of bread making, there is so much symbolism, really. We could get lost in that topic, but just of creation itself and what it takes to kind of make something, the aspect of time. Whereas the professor is like too much heaven, like it's not it's not Eucharistic enough, it's not like kind of embodied in a practical thing. So
That's one reason why I wrote my book, Beauty, Spirit, Matter. So I can put my hand in the copy I probably found. Here we are. Yeah, in this book here, it's a series of essays, and it's called Beauty, Spirit, Matter because I knew as a Christian, but just even if you're not a Christian, just day-to-day experience, matter and spirit have got to go hand in hand. And truth is always found in that. It struck me how apparently scribes in the time of Jesus at least, or Pharisees, sort of religious teachers, were expected to have a skill. So St. Paul was a tent maker. So he was like a high academic, he really knew the Old Testament, but he was also expected to be rooted in the ground like a tree. And we talked a bit earlier about how if something, a chair, whatever, is made with love, then that object subsequently gives off that love. I like the image of a stone. You put the stone in the sun, when the sun sets, it'll give off the warmth that it absorbed during the day. And this is related to symbolism because I've found among my icon students, the ones who tend to make the best icons are the ones who are present and loving the material they're painting with, obviously loving the subject, the saint, the painting, and loving the process. So they're actually present and loving the process. Whereas students are sort of all over the place, so almost irritated by the process or they're scared of it, whatever. But those who make it with love and are calm and enter into the process and are subservient to the process in a way, it teaches them a lot of wisdom. Could you talk a bit about this?
Yes, I think it's a great topic, like why we have that sense that when we see like say like a table made by like a folk or just folk art in general, that even though it's not academically correct or it's a bit crude or whatever, it's a bit off in ways that it just kind of radiates with this warmth and love, and that's much preferable sometimes to something which is made extremely precisely but is
almost all marks of humanity have been erased by precision.
And I think it's really a very Christian thing because what the craftsperson who makes something with love does is they create something, but they don't create as this kind of tyrant who just like takes this matter and just imposes their thing on it. But like you were saying in the interview with Dylan, you have to be able to listen to what's there and kind of draw out of it its strength. In a way, you're being exactly what a good parent does, where the good parent doesn't have this perfect idea of the perfect child and then force their child to just like conform to that. There is some aspect of kind of teaching and discipline even, but also listening and perceiving what is already in the child, what strengths they have, and then drawing that out of them. Like the word education actually is like the root is like the word eduction. It has to do with educing,
the drawing out,
drawing out rather than stuffing in, as you say. And so that really reminds me of the book of Genesis, where God creates the world, but he doesn't just say, okay, now make this plant and this plant and this plant and this plant. He says, let the earth bring forth. And he says, it's almost like saying, let it be.
Give
like
permission to be yourself.
Yes, and so there's something very like deep and paradoxical in that about how God creates, where he affords our freedom. So although we are dependent on God, we really are free, and he kind of creates by saying, like let the earth bring forth, like let.
Yes, I never thought of that. It is true that the earlier things God commands, let there be light, or create light, come forth. But having created, as it were, the matrix, the womb of the earth, he just says, okay, let's see what happens, sort of thing, in a way. Interesting. Father Vasilius Kontakakis, the abbot, now retired of Aveyron, where I was, he had a very unusual approach as an abbot. Some abbots and monasteries are quite strict there. It's like an army. And they attract a lot of people often, because some people like that. Father Vasilius, in part I think through his own, obviously his own experience of God, but also through the influence of Dostoevsky and people, really realised that free will is what makes us probably most in the image of God, our freedom. It's only by freedom that we can love. So he had an interesting way of guiding people, if that's the right word. He would always throw things back and make you feel free. I always went away freer with him, but also with more insight. So in that sense, my options were closed down, but in a good way, because I realised actually that course of action just would be a waste of energy and time. Yeah. So always he was trying to help you regain your dignity as a prince, really, rather than just a slave being told what to do. It's an awesome responsibility. Most of us don't want it. That's why we shy away from things. That's, I suppose, why people like systems. They're like, blame politics on things rather than it's my fault that happened. So the process of making that can teach us wisdom. In the Old Testament, the word wisdom and skill virtually meant the same thing. When God revealed to Moses how to make the tent of meeting, he said, "I put upon that what's his name, Zebul." It's the name of I forget his name, the craftsman.
Is it?
That's it.
Is it Zerubbabel or?
It might something like that. Yeah. He said, "I've given him wisdom and skill." They're virtually the same thing. And I've noticed that even, ironically, an atheistic, just a secular craftsperson, I always found that if they're real craftsmen, there's real wisdom and humility because they've learned to, as it were, listen to the material and then, as you said, raise the material not to dominate, but to raise it up. Yeah. And I know a lot has been written about how perhaps Protestantism has been behind the Industrial Revolution in the sense of the Industrial Revolution as a sort of dominance of nature. Nature's just like a big bank you take money out of, or things you've got to subjugate, rather than a priestly and a royal approach. So the priestly and royal approach to creation is to, yes, I'm a master, but I'm there to make it more articulate in the praise of God. I'm there to discover the logos of each thing, to listen to the symbolic value of each thing. Is that pigment actually opaque, or is it actually more translucent, or in between? And then bring out the inherent quality of that, and then combine the different materials together so they're not just being allowed to become themselves, but in relationship, in community, like a poet does, or a builder, whatever.
The gardeners.
All these images overlap, don't they?
And it's a big question of how to scale that, because that's kind of the issue with the standing reserve thing, is that over time and industrialization, the people in charge of kind of getting the whatever it is, like say the timber from this particular forest, are probably not on the ground there, as you say, appreciating the forest itself and kind of being with it and understanding it by being in it, and then kind of taking what you can afford to take whilst also not destroying it. The people kind of in charge of just getting the materials are not present at all, so there's something about that presence which is necessary, but you do also want to be able to scale things, so that is a problem of how to do that.
I think scale is a big issue. We can do politics here, but not in the narrow sense, but in the sense of the city, the polis. So your image of the woods. So if someone in government who's never been in a wood has got to determine, how many acres do I have to be cut down. To them it's just figures. But to the man on the ground, the woodsman, he says, well, if we cut down that many trees, then there'll be erosion, and when we try to replant, it won't work. And so this disparity between the quantitative approach of an economist, perhaps, and the qualitative approach of the man on the ground. Perhaps that's why cathedrals of old, medieval cathedrals, are so consistently good, because normally the architects actually had been stonemasons. They understood the material, they knew what they could and couldn't do. They knew the strengths and the weaknesses, or worked with both.
It just reminds me of in The Ethics of Beauty, one of my favorite books by Timothy Petitsis. He talks about making. He's talking sort of about Christopher Alexander and the pattern language idea. I forget exactly what the concrete topic was, but it just stuck with me. He was had this image of traditional craftspeople making a home, and there was something about like how they spent almost an entire day like figuring out exactly where to put the window. And he talks about this as the process of the logos. So you have this situation, these circumstances, like where you want to build a house, say, and then you have the logos, like this pattern of a house that you want to build, and how that needs to kind of come down, but that it's also really like a crucifixion, that the particular circumstances are all these like sort of difficulties, like these little problems, and how the logos needs to kind of descend into them and kind of be crucified on them in a way. It sounds dark, but then how when that is done fully and properly with love, there is a resurrection in the sense that now you have a house, like now something actually exists, and everything is like that, even if it's done more or less well. Everything is a logos crucified on a particular or a set of particulars, and then that thing's existence is like the resurrection in a way. I just thought that was a beautiful image.
Yeah, I quite understand. So could you expand the process of the crucifixion and continue with the image of the house?
Just in the sense that like the logos itself could be so many things, but then you have these particular circumstances, and so it has to kind of descend into them and kind of, in a sense, be nailed to them, like be
limited by them.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay, yeah. So you could design 1,000 different houses, but you've got a property so big.
Yeah.
You've got a tree that you can't cut down. Yeah. You've got a budget. All the time, your grand image of a Versailles palace is being limited, being crucified. But then, if you're a good designer, something resurrects that's more beautiful than if you had all the money in the universe. Perhaps.
Well, the thing is, it's not, I mean, yes, but it's also not really if. Like, everything is like that in the sense that everything is a union of heaven and earth. And it's just that now the thing exists. If it didn't come down out of heaven and be crucified on particulars, then there would be nothing. Nothing would exist. So the resurrection element actually is just the fact that now this is how things exist at all.
Okay.
But there are obviously then higher degrees of that, like where something is done really well, then it's like a fuller image of that.
Okay. So even if you end up with a rather ugly thing, the process there, it's obviously gone wrong somewhere, is the same.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. It's funny, often people who are against religious icons end up, they find out they actually do have icons. You know, a lady said to me after giving a talk about icons, I think icons are bad, you shouldn't have icons, they're bad. I said, do you have pictures on your wall? Of course I do, at home. So what are they of? A family, there you are, you have icons.
Yeah.
So I think with the good approach to the symbolic is that, in fact, all of us live symbolically. It's just a matter of where we apply that reality to.
Yeah.
So there's no arbitrary cut-off.
Definitely.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. We could go on for another 3 hours, but I'm aware that people's time is limited. But I would like to have further discussions for our podcast and for the Chichester workshop on these subjects, because it's really rich seeing.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you, viewers. And do tune in for more. We're going to have more coming out about certainly every month. We're going to produce these, but hopefully more regularly. So you can look at some of these on my Patreon, also on the Chichester workshop. The website is Chichester Workshop for Liturgical Art, and some of these we'll also put onto YouTube. Thank you. Right.